Randolph. I am a Mod 6 graduate and am the co-chair of the Mod MPOD alumni community. As Kevin mentioned, our webinar is a little different, and we're hoping that this will be similar to how we handle webinars in the future, where we use them more as interactive exchanges. In addition to presenting didactic information, we'll also have a much more engaged discussion. Most of you I see on the call know Sarah. Sarah is currently a change management advisor at Metro Health. And as importantly, for over 25 years, she is very well known in the nonprofit community in Cleveland, not only having worked there, but having served as a consultant and coach. I'm not going to spend any more time. As I said, I think most of you know Sarah because she has a very interesting discussion today. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Loretta. So as Kevin warned everybody, in a few minutes, after I run through just some of my initial thinking that led to this webinar, I really wanted to turn it over to the group to have us all consider and talk about questions that we ask clients at the very beginning when we're just scouting and entering, considering a possible project or engagement. And what I have in mind at that point is to go back to this kind of Hollywood Squares format where everyone can see everyone and do some thumbs up, thumbs down kinds of feedback getting from you about some of these questions, and then having you propose your own that you use in that process. And at that point, Kevin is going to unmute all of us. So hopefully wherever you are, there is not a lot of background noise. And if there is, maybe mute yourself unless you have something that you want to say. And of course, we can use the chat area to propose questions or respond if you don't want to be on camera for some reason. So I'm going to share my screen and go through some of my initial thinking with you at this point. And if you've got a question or need to stop us or something, raise your hand in the chat room or otherwise signal that you want some airtime. So, okay. And, all right. So what I want to have us consider is the scouting process. And I want us to be thinking about not just with our consulting hat on, entering into a project with a possible project with a client, but also for those who are in transition, how do you find an organization that is aligned with your OD values, and how do you find out what's the important stuff to find out about the organization or where you might be going to see if that opportunity is right for you in terms of possibly joining that organization. So I want to consider scouting really broadly as we go. And where this came from, and I am going to see if I can move this up. I'm going to actually minimize there we go. Okay. I've been thinking a lot about how I first start getting engaged with a client and how frank and open and overt I can be with my OD skills, or whether it's going to be a situation where I'm using OD in a stealth kind of way. And for those of you that don't really have a sense of the difference of these two, I think it'll be illuminated as we go. But of course, I prefer to be able to speak my own language and speak OD speak with clients, but a lot of times they don't speak that language. And sometimes they're not even interested. So we have to go in and do the work without saying what it is. I also wanted to make sure that I was going into client work or client systems with my eyes even wider open than they normally are. And really trying to move my assumptions to the side and my hopes and wishes to the side and really see what I'm getting into with very clear perception. I also have been thinking about kind of a larger picture. Does it make sense for us as an OD community, as an alumni community, to create some kind of an Angie's List or a Glassdoor where we could be giving information to each other about good organizations to work in that really get OD, or warn each other about organizations that are have values that don't align with OD values and would be perhaps a mistake to get involved with, or they aren't ready for us, if you will. You know, would it be useful to have some kind of a network of information that could be useful across our community? And in some ways, the big question for me is, and I've been doing OD for about 30 years, so, and the field is a little older than that. Why is OD not as well known as we wish it were? Why is OD not a household word like an MBA is? Why is emotional intelligence foreign to some people, or appreciative inquiry an unknown concept? Is it time for us to be thinking about how to raise the visibility of our field? That's a larger question that we're really not going to get into tonight, but I wanted you to know that was one of the questions that was fueling my curiosity about this topic. So as I see it, when we are scouting and entering an organization and working in an organization, we have to balance the concept of our words creating our worlds, the language that we use, the language that we OD practitioners like to use, our OD speak, and creating a world that aligns with our OD values versus meeting the client where they are. And it isn't a versus really, it's more of a balancing. We know that language is powerful, so if we're going to meet the client where they are, we actually have to speak their language, not our language. And I still step in it sometimes and start waxing poetic about things I'm really passionate about, emotional intelligence and the intentional change theory and all this stuff, and forget that that can be a turnoff to clients. So we really have to balance the language and where the client is. Which then reminded me of a concept that I learned from neuro-linguistic programming back in the Mod 6 program, pacing and leading, where we meet the client where they are, and in order to, help them get where they want to go. So we're meeting them where they are, but they're going to be evolving and growing. We use powerful language, and we, more importantly, help them create their own new language for the journey of change that they're embarking on. So we start where they are, but we help them get to a new place. And that might even involve giving them language lessons about what we're passionate about and the theories we understand and the concepts that we use in our work with them. So in the scouting process, it's really important for us to remind ourselves about our values first. We're a practitioner, we're about to intervene in a system or with an individual, and we need to be firmly grounded in where we're coming from. And I was reminded to go back to Eric Nielsen's book, Becoming an OD Practitioner, and kind of revisiting what he has to say about scouting. And I found these two key values that he talks about, that we want the organization or the client system to be candid about their personal experience of their organizational life, to be honest and to be aware of it and be able to talk about it. We also want the organizational members that we're working with to take responsibility for their own behavior. We need to do the same. We need to be candid about our experience of their organizational life, and we need to take responsibility for our actions as we intervene. We're not quite anthropologists hiding in the bushes behind the gorilla village, watching them, because the minute we're there, we're intervening. We're making ripples in the system. So we need to know that we're taking, that we're having some impact, even by just asking questions. And then we take responsibility for our own behavior, knowing that. I also really loved Nielsen's discussion of OD's mission, that it's focused on the long-run improvement of an organization's problem-solving ability. What this says to me is what I've devoted my OD practice to is you meet them where they are, but by gosh, you get them to a new place where their capability is expanded. They might call you again to help them with something, but not the same thing that you helped them with the first time, because they've evolved, they've grown, they can do that old stuff themselves now, but they need you for something new because they've moved to a new place. So we're trying to enhance their capacity to do work on their own. So think about that as kind of a grounding space for considering scouting. And again, from Nielsen's book, he says scouting refers to the activity of deciding whether we want to work with the client in the first place. And for those folks just starting a consulting practice, we all know the temptation of taking any job that comes along, whether we think it's a good project or not. And he says in the book, he's done that himself. And the times when the warning bells were going off and he ignored them were mistakes. So is there a match between the needs of the organization and what we can help with, or what OD can help with? Does the client have sufficient influence to make the project work? Are the values and what we're going to do in the project aligned enough to get general support for the change or the project that we're trying to do? And lastly, and I love that Eric put this in there, is the project interesting to us as practitioners? If we're going in on a project that really doesn't turn our engines, we're not going to take our full selves and our best effort to it. So he's talking about us as people really being intentional about whether or not we want this work, or this organization that we're considering joining, or the client or the project. And I've certainly had my fair share of mistakes as an internal and an external consultant, where I was doing a project in a system or with a client where OD work or my values that I was trying to promulgate in the project were not aligned, were not accepted by the client. The client was in some cases saying, oh, that sounds great, and didn't really mean it, or meant it only in the moment. And then the moment passed and there wasn't that understanding or support, and I got headaches and heartaches. So some examples certainly that I've encountered are when command and control leadership is firmly entrenched, or there's not candid discussion about what's really happening, or people are not taking responsibility for the impact that they're having, or for the status quo, or for not wanting to change, not taking responsibility for that, or all of the above. So then the question becomes, well, how do we find out where the client is? And that's really the scouting process. So this is the last point at which we're going through a slide deck. We're going to be jumping into the discussion and interactive element in just a minute. What I want to say about this is there is so much more information available to us now in the age of the internet than there was probably 30 years ago when I was starting out. But we've got organizational websites we can look at. We've got annual reports we can read. We can visit the offices or location and take an eyeball look at how it looks. What are people doing, and what are the aesthetics of the organization? What are offices like? if you can get into the office of a decision maker, do they have a bookshelf and what's on the bookshelf? So there's a lot of things that we can see, we can do research, and we really should be doing due diligence and doing research to find out whatever it is that we can find out by looking, but we also can listen. So we can get the word on the street. What are people saying? Word of mouth. We could observe meetings and listen to how people interact with each other, and we can talk to insiders that we know. So there's a lot of information available, and then if we can get in front of the client or in an interview, we have the power to ask questions. So that's what I want to move to next. So be prepared, everybody. Your cameras and are about to go on, and your mute is about to go off. So I am going to unshare my screen, if I can figure out how to do that. There it is. Okay. So I'm hoping that folks will be visible any minute. Wave if you are. Hi, Bill. And Kevin is going to unmute everyone. So once you're unmuted, if it's noisy where you are, please mute yourself again until you want to say something. All right. Earl, it's really dark where you are.
It probably will be because I'm in my car on the ride home.
Oh, you okay. All right, that explains it. I feel like, who's that lady in the romper room? I see Catherine and Nick and Rafaela and Diana. All right, lots of faces. Good. So what I want to do is read off some of my favorite questions that I like to ask clients, and have everybody who's on camera, if you like the question, do a thumbs up. If you don't like the question, do a thumbs down, or you're not so sure. And then maybe we'll have a discussion after each question and see how that goes. And if that seems to be clunky, we'll try something else. All right. So in my experience, even though many of us have been trained in appreciative inquiry, very few organizations, even though we want them to be strengthening their strengths and just going from a wonderful place to an even better place, mostly clients are reaching out to us because they're in pain, right? So my first question is usually something like, what challenge is facing you now? And I'll sometimes get a long story, but I'm going to dive into what's the biggest, scariest challenge that they're experiencing. So what do you think of that question? Do you use that question? Yeah? Kinda? All right, good. I'd like to also ask, what do you want that you don't have right now? What do you want to get, particularly from this project? So if this project were wildly successful, what would you have that you don't have now? So what do you think of that one? Yeah, nodding heads or thumbs up? I can see a thumb. All right. Do any of you ask other basic entry questions? Those are two very basic ones. Anybody have any favorites they want to share?
Sometimes.
Is that Bill?
Yeah, I started talking. Sometimes I'll ask the question, what do you have that's going really well now? And I stress that it's important that whatever we do, we don't want to lose the benefits of all the, like people might be very flexible. So that's a good skill. We want to make sure we don't lose that when we make any changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, so do all of us try to ask a question, something like that? What are your strengths and assets that you don't want to lose? You want to keep even in change? Great. Okay, good. Any other basics before we dive a tiny bit deeper? Basic opening questions? Okay. I like to ask, what have you already tried? In the context of what's facing you, what's your issue, what have you been throwing at it so far? What do you think of that one? Yeah, good. Okay. How about this one? What are your organization members telling you about the issue or possible solutions? Anybody ever asked that one?
No.
So you don't like that one, Bill?
I like it, but usually I ask people individually to get a sense of it rather than asking at the beginning. I think it's a good question. I just don't tend to lead with that question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would lead with it either, but I ask it out of a sense that a lot of times clients are bringing in a consultant to tell them something that their people are already telling them.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious to know whether they're even paying attention. Like, do they even know what their folks already think? Or has that been a part of what they tried? Is, yeah, well, we asked our people and they didn't have any good ideas. Or, what are you talking about asking our people? What? We're asking you. Like, well, okay, that says to me that there's maybe a communication or a credibility barrier or something. And then when you do action research and you're feeding back data, it's might be taken in a different way. Anyway.
Sarah, could I ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ann O'Connor. I'm curious, when you ask, what have you already tried, do you take that deeper and ask what worked and what, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
What was the outcome? Because I wouldn't want to just ask that question and not go deeper, I don't think.
No, I think you can go deeper on all of these. They're sort of conversation, consider them conversation starters, I would think.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would certainly want to know what their experience was, particularly if they've already tried something OD-esque or OD-ish, and they had some kind of an experience. That's baggage that could be good baggage or not. It could be Louis Vuitton, right? Or it could be really bad baggage. So yeah, absolutely, I agree. What about, what are you willing to let go of? Yeah, interesting question.
Yes.
That's not a leading question. That's a get into it, into the conversation question. But I think that begins to tease at how open the client or organization might be to things that are emergent, that are unpredictable. If they're not willing to let go of some specific things that the data might encourage them to let go of, you want to know that as early as you can. And that's a provocative question. A lot of people haven't thought about that. So I think that kind of a question is one of those, we're anthropologists, but we are already making an intervention just by the questions that we have. Getting somebody to think about something differently. Is this useful? Should we keep going?
Sure.
All right. So if I ask that, what are you willing to let go of, and I got a blank stare, I might follow up with, for example, how open are you to something unexpected emerging? Some wild idea or an opinion or a direction that you've not ever thought of, and it pops up. What do you think about that one?
I like it.
Yeah. Okay. The next one gets to the history and what have you tried, but specifically asking, have you worked with OD consultants in the past? If so, what was your experience?
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
Maybe. Not crazy about that one, but Bill?
No, it's good. I usually know the answer before I ask the question. As soon as you say the word consultant, there's like faces, frowny faces. So, yeah.
Ah, okay. There might be a way to euphemize that, maybe, or spin that. I sometimes will just do an open-ended thing at the end about what questions do they have about how I work. I think that's sort of an opening, if they take it, to start talking a little bit about my values and how I typically approach things, and try to see if they get it, if there's a reaction to that. I actually have a paragraph in my contract, or my proposal actually, that talks about that I approach things in a very interactive way, and whatever I design for them will be highly engaging and participative, and so that it's in writing that it's going to be a little different, or it's going to be a little intense sometimes. Yeah, what do you think of that? A question about how I work. Do you do that already?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
One way or another? Okay. This next question is more for, I think, folks who are looking at a job transition. Where is the OD function in your organization? Is there one? And where do you have it in the structure?
That'd be a good question.
Yeah, nodding head, liking that one. I have a bit of a bias that if OD is under HR and the head of HR is not being trained, then there's going to be a difficulty there, perhaps. So that's, to me, are some red flags. If the OD function is underneath HR and there is a traditional approach to HR at the top of HR, then that's a place that I will have difficulty personally. It's not unheard of for heads of HR to be trained in OD. And if that's the case, we could be headed into something really exciting. Sometimes I ask specific questions like, are you familiar with emotional intelligence? Are you familiar with appreciative inquiry? Are you familiar with the work of Richard Boyatzis or David Cooperrider? Because I'm working locally, so sometimes people will have heard of them. That is generally going to be after I've gotten a sense that maybe some overt OD might be okay. And I'm not going to be just doing really cool facilitation in a mysterious way, doing covert OD. So if I get a little bit of a sense, maybe by looking at the bookshelf, what's on the bookshelf in the client's office, and I'm seeing some books that look like books on my bookshelf, I might go in that direction and say, are these ideas new to you? Does anybody else do that?
No.
Yeah. So really, that's the end of my questions. What I wanted to do now was just find out what questions you have. And Kevin, if you muted everybody, can you unmute them again? Or
I've unmuted everybody.
Yeah.
If they're muted, they've done it to themselves, so they should be able to unmute
Okay.
themselves.
So if anybody's got a contribution of a favorite question you ask in scouting, either type it into the chat or shout it out.
I mean, for me, I'm in kind of a weird situation because I'm an engineer, and I spin the story that, engineering solutions will not solve your problem. They only get you part of the way. And so I take them down a story of, the engineering solution helps you, but you need the OD to implement sustainable results. And then I introduce them to the concept of action research. But a lot of the clients that I work with are turned off by touchy-feely anything that's not concrete. And so I try to say, look, this is part of the process of improving your organization, is to do this collaborative approach. And I appeal to their sense of that makes sense, and that there's a value in streamlining the process through collaboration and you get better results. And then I kind of get a sense from them how willing they are to go down that path. If they're not willing to go down that path, it kind of self-selects them out of me working with them. Now, some people will say they're all in, but then when it comes time to do the project,
Yes.
all in. And so.
Oh, that's what you meant by all in. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I don't necessarily ask them an appreciative inquiry, but I'll ask them appreciative inquiry type questions and get a sense of how open they are to having a discussion about positive things versus all the ills of their company. So.
Yeah. And there's lots of ways that you can shift from the what pain are you in to the positives by just reframing your questions, just moving to a new place without ever saying the word appreciative inquiry.
Yeah, it's like stealth. It's kind of stealth OD because I don't think they know. But I'll like introduce force field analysis as a tool. And so they just see it as another tool, but it's really not. It's really more on the OD side than the engineering side,
Yeah.
And so as long as I can show them how it's tied to what they're trying to accomplish, I think they're good with it. But so that's my whole goal. Is just trying to get a sense of are they willing to follow that process or not? And if they are, then we're good.
Who else? Who else would like to chime in with it? Yes, Diana.
Sarah. I would say in looking at the challenges and also what does success look like, I try to get the client to quantify that a bit. So what does that mean? So in terms of what kind of pain are they feeling? What kind of gain do they want to achieve by this? And part of that goes into establishing the value of doing this work. Because sometimes they have no idea how a consultant might price this or how a particular solution might come to play on what they want to have happen. And I'll also ask them about some things that are going on in the environment that might be making this more of a priority now or that is making it concerning. So for instance, I do a lot of work with healthcare organizations, and there's often something that's regulatory, or there's something that's shifting in the insurance space, or there's something that's shifting in the economy that that are occurring to make something very important at that moment or in the near term.
Great. I think Loretta, you would like some. Go ahead.
Sarah, it struck me in that comment. I'm sorry. If that was Bill talking about being an engineer. One thing that you sort of touched on in terms of words create worlds, but one thing that I find is very helpful is if you speak or create analogies in the language that your client's system understands. For example, when working with engineering firms, the way I describe OD is we are the systems engineers of the human side of the organization. Or when talking to physicians or healthcare facilities, what analogy will they relate to? We're the emergency medicine, or we're the, family physician.
Right.
So to immediately put in their mind something that they can relate to.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example of using their language to describe what we do. Yeah, that's great. Great. Who else?
Well, if I can throw in another one, I would say finding out who the decision makers are. So who's going to weigh in on this? What kind of a process? Sometimes you come across situations where, everyone on the board thinks they're going to make the decision, but it really needs to be the CEO or the executive director. So it provides an opportunity for some clarification on roles and responsibilities and the process that we'll use to engage these important stakeholders, but making it very clear to them who the decision maker is or are.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
Just to expand on that, one thing I'll typically ask is, who else should I talk to? Because that allows the onus the sole onus to come off of that one person. It also gives you insight into who he or she thinks is valuable in the organization, or what their organization is like.
Yeah, good. What else?
And there's always is there a budget for this?
Yeah.
Always a good question.
Yep. We don't want
Or
to get
to
paid
ask
in bananas.
in a positive way. What is the budget for this? I assume there's a budget, right? Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of times, if the organization or the client has not really thought about that yet, that's a good thing to know. Definitely.
Right. I remember years ago when I was first starting my consulting practice, and I had a great mentor who was someone who came out of Ernst & Young. And one of the things that he taught me was, Diana, you send out the first proposal without any money on it. So you just put out what it is you want to do, the approach you're going to do, the benefits that you expect to come, and all those wonderful things about your background. And make sure that you are on the same page and that they love what you were telling them before you put a price to it. And if you can, give them more than one option. I wouldn't give them 12, but 2 might be good.
Yeah, I've done that before. Door number 1 and door number 2. Yeah,
right. It's funny how many times they go for the higher price. They just like that version better. They come up with the money somehow. So.
Well, I wonder if there's a psychology in that of not wanting to go for the low budget option. Anne, did you want to add something? Oh, cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. No.
I think her phone disconnected because she had called in. And
okay.
And this might be her. Anne, is your number the 773 number? Yes, maybe. Try it. Testing. Nope.
No, phooey.
All right. Is it better now?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry. I was curious if anyone's asked questions along the line, what steps would you need to take to have an appropriate budget approved?
Great.
So it's a little different twist on asking a yes/no question of, do you have a budget, or what is your budget? Maybe less threatening.
It's an approval process.
And that has the advantage of cluing you in on other decision makers, because they will figure in those steps. Yeah, good. What else?
I like to ask who's going to be involved in the project, because again, that gives you an idea of what their culture is. Like if they're just including the executive team and they're not including people that are working in the office, for example, it kind of gives you an idea of who they're going to invite to the party. And that kind of gives you something you can discuss about the importance of maybe bringing in more people than what they would normally bring in.
Great. That's yeah, I love that. Rafaela?
Building on what Bill is saying, who might the supporters be and who might the naysayers be, so that we kind of know how to engage both groups of folks.
Great.
That's a good one.
Anybody else? I'm sure there are more zingers out there. Yeah, go ahead.
Sarah? Another thing I was thinking is, are there any places you would, do you think we might encounter resistance?
Right. Yeah. Good.
And Sarah, it's Loretta. Just one thing that I typically ask is, what in your opinion, if all things are possible, what's the smallest thing that can be done that would have the greatest impact?
Yeah. So you might get them to think really big at the beginning, but at some point, so you take it down to a more granular level, and yeah, good. Anyone else? Well, a couple of concluding remarks, and if anybody else thinks of something, just raise your hand. I think I have been guilty too many times of underestimating the importance of doing good scouting. That I was so happy to have a client want to work with me that was like, okay, let's go. Let's just jump right in. And I didn't take enough time to get the lay of the land with tough lessons along the way. And I think I am rediscovering the importance of a gentle entry, a conversation, not rushing into something, but really trying to get the best feel that I can, the best glimpse that I can into what it's going to be like working with that client and what they want. And I mean, I'm a natural problem solver, so half the time when I'm listening to the story of the challenge, I'm already trying to solve their problem in my head. And I am continually trying to stop myself from doing that, because that's not being fully present. And it's also making a bunch of assumptions that I don't have enough information to make, certainly. So I'm really struggling with slowing myself down and trying to get a real sense and really listening to the client about what drives them and what I need to know about to be an effective support, so that it's their agenda, not my agenda. And the more time I spend on that, the better it goes. So yeah, even with clients that have seen my work and know my work and want my involvement, if I have a prior relationship with them or a recommendation from someone else that they work with me, so I've got an endorsement, it's still important to get to know them and get to know their situation firsthand early. So I wind up having better projects with fewer bumps. So does anybody have any stories to share about lessons learned in that regard? Things that they wish they had known and found out a little too late?
I've done subcontracting before with other companies where they haven't included me in on the initial steps, and we got the project. And then we actually did the kickoff meeting, and the client said, well, this isn't what we want. And it's like, okay, well, I can't be involved in a project unless I get a chance to talk with the client before we do the proposal, because in many cases, what the client wants is not what the proposal is for. And I didn't know because I didn't talk to the client directly. And so I think that's, to me, a big one. You're not going to include me in the upfront discussions, and I shouldn't be involved in the project. And even though I may be slow and I want the project, I really shouldn't should not do that project.
Yeah. Anybody else? Or a success story.
Something similar. I was doing a project with a healthcare organization, and the person that brought me in, and this was to redesign their patient care delivery model, and the person that brought me in was their head of it was a C-level person that was in charge of their clinical services. And in the initial discovery, I was insisting on talking to the president and the CEO. And the CEO I had a long-term relationship with, so it's not as if I was an unknown entity to him. And she was adamant that nope, she knew exactly what the president wanted. She knew exactly what the CEO wanted. There was no need for me to talk to them. They don't like consultants. They don't want to talk to consultants. And at the very first meeting that had probably about 8 or 9 different senior execs in this meeting, and the president decided at the last minute he wanted to come in and open the session and say a few words. Well, that went on for 45 minutes. And it wasn't the issue that he took 45 minutes on the agenda, because you can always zig and zag. But what he said was completely different than what this chief medical officer thought it would be. And so he left the room and people were just like chattering away. And we let them do that for a few minutes because they were all kind of surprised. And then we took a break and I pulled her aside and I said, "Did you see that coming?" And she said, "Oh no, that was a big surprise to me." So we completely redesigned the session and the 15-minute break to get enough information and enough useful content and engagement out of that first session to be able to go forward and redesign the project.
Wow.
So
I think that's a big deal in OD, because like in engineering, it's pretty clear, there's a solution and everything. But when you get into OD, so many times people are trying to address a symptom that has nothing to do with the root cause problem. They're trying to solve something that's not really. And so you have to be open when you have your kickoff meeting or some of your meetings to just take complete different direction and just say, okay, we're going to abandon this world to keep the process, but we're going to change how we do this and just be open to doing that. And I think that happens a lot more in OD projects.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the difference between what the client wants and what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah, what they think they want and what they might actually need. And I think what Eric Nielsen is saying to us in that awesome book is we need to be able to be candid with the client about our experience of their organization.
Yeah.
And there are lots of ways to do that, frankly, but gently. Like, I'm curious. I'm not really sure I understand this and this that seem to not be connected. What can you tell me about that? And approach it in an inquiry like that anthropologist that we are. I'm trying to understand the norms in your village. So I think, in essence, the scouting process is a lot about being an anthropologist, finding the artifacts and finding the norms and the behaviors and the unwritten things as well as the written things. So we're talking about overt and covert OD, and we're also talking about overt and covert culture, right? That we have to discover as much as we can. In our remaining 5 minutes, I have another question to ask you, and this is really by way of market research in the sense of the possibility of making this a project of the alumni community or the steering group, is this notion of creating some kind of a repository of information about organizations, companies, maybe even leaders, individual leaders who are aligned with OD or not aligned with OD. How many of you know about Angie's List? It's a way to approve contractors, right? I don't know if it's an Angie's List model or if it's a Glassdoor model or something. Is that an idea that is worth pursuing? And is anyone here who feels that way interested in helping with that?
It's an Angie's List of what?
Of of organizations where OD is alive and well. You know, hey, you know, I'm a little nervous about a rating system, but you know, in this organization you can do overt OD, and they totally get it, and they've been to classes at Case. Or this organization is probably ready for OD, but they don't know it yet. So don't say the word theory. Don't use the word consultant. Don't, you know, they're engineers, so speak to them about numbers and ROI, and don't talk about X. That we could sort of pool our knowledge about organizations out there, which also might be useful to job seekers. Does that answer the question? And maybe it's about individual leaders, senior leaders, because they move and they sometimes take culture with them. You know, the culture's being driven by a leader. So, you know, that person might have fomented really good OD stuff in their organization, and then they go somewhere else and they start to do it in another organization. I don't know.
Question.
I'm open to thoughts.
I'm wondering if you're envisioning this as being an open platform where the public can see it, or is it just something within our alumni systems?
At this point, within our alumni system. Who knows? I mean, maybe there's a potential, just like Angie's list, where contractors are bothered if they get a bad rating. Like organizations who, you know, want to be appealing to OD people want a good rating. But I don't think it's about numbers. I don't know.
I mean, I think it would
But at this point, I want to start small.
I think it'd be a challenge, because I think that companies can switch from one day to a next. Like if companies are just happy and things are going good enough, I think they may not be open to OD. But if something really bad happens, then suddenly they're open to all options, including OD. And so it's a very dynamic need and want. I think if they've exhausted all the traditional things and they don't seem to be helping them, those are the kinds of companies that tend to have a huge need, that say, yeah, I'm going to go to OD because I think there's some value there, and I want to at least try it and see, you know. So I think it'd be very dynamic and kind of difficult to do. I mean, certainly you can look at by size of company, how many people are actively involved in OD types of activities. And if there's like one person and there's thousands of people in the company, then you might say, yeah, that company doesn't really support it, even though they have one person. I mean, that might be a first line indicator.
Yeah.
Yes, Sarah,
Catherine, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it can be a resource for people that are looking for work or job search. But I think we have a new opportunity to start with our own alumni community. You know, we've got several hundred people working in dozens of organizations across the world. And maybe we start out with simply sourcing our own people. Because, for example, the company that I work for has over 100 OD consultants, but the world knows it as a systems engineering company. So I think we can't make assumptions just by the public face of what it is, but maybe by sourcing our own colleagues, it would start us to see if it would be worth pursuing.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'd be a bit concerned that the reviews, just as with any other platform, are quite subjective. So if I go in and approach an organization and they don't want to hear what I have to say, but you know, you go in, Sarah, and they fall in love with it, and you've said just the right thing to the right person in the right way, then I think they don't get it, but you think they're wonderful.
That's a good point, and that's one of the reasons why I'm nervous about a rating system per se. You know, 5 stars, 2 stars, 1 star. What does that even mean? But yeah, and you're so right that exactly can happen. Catherine, you talked about a leaderboard or a leader sheet.
before Catherine answers, I'm getting kicked out of the cafe that I'm running this in, so I'm gonna stop.
Oh.
I'm gonna stop the recording. You guys can keep talking. I believe that it's set up so that when I leave, everyone else can stay. But I just wanted to let you guys know that the recording will stop here.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, this may